Welcome to the Regenerative Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Emily Griffith, who is the founder and CEO at Lil Bucks. Lil Bucks is supporting regenerative agriculture with its various organic and regenerative organic sprouted buckwheat products. In this episode, we learn about Emily's international inspiration to bring a thriving buckwheat market to the U.S., and Emily takes us behind the scenes on her 5-year journey growing the business through a pandemic, trade wars, regular wars, and massive global supply chain headwinds. With that said, this might be the most fun episode to date, and at the end of the recording, my face literally hurt from laughing and smiling so much. Emily is truly a joy to be around, and she brought some buck wild energy to the podcast. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Super fired up today to have our friend Emily from Lil Bucks. So welcome, Emily.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am also super excited. We briefly met at Expo West, didn't get a ton of time to converse there, but I'm really looking forward to learning more about the Lil Bucks story. Sorry, I said Lil Bucks. It's Lil Bucks, L-I-L.
Yeah, like Lil Wayne.
Yeah,
Right,
like
yeah,
put some
Lil
respect on her
Bucks.
name,
Yeah,
pal.
but
I
Bucks,
I called myself out. We're starting with integrity here. So for those who are unfamiliar with the brand, give us the lay of the land. What's your product assortment look like? What flavors do you make? Where can people find you today?
Lil Bucks. So we're America's buckwheat brand. So we make crunchy super snacks called Cluster Bucks, superfood granola clusters, and then super seed toppings called Lil Bucks, sprouted buckwheat crunch, and those add crunch to smoothies, oatmeal, yogurt, salads, etc. And then the last little magic thing we make out of buckwheat right now is our everything buck seasoning, which is like our take on the everything bagel seasoning, but with the superfood benefits and crunch from the buckwheat. So we're going
Love
buck
that
wild
name.
here. Yeah. There's a lot of puns to be had. We're just getting started.
I could not support more being buck wild. I feel like that might be the best adjective to describe just my general ethos.
It's literally like now when we've been at trade shows, it's like the best hook. Like people will be like over having conversations and you're just like, you ready to go buck wild? And people are like, what? And like, I don't know, buck wild, like the brand is really bright and kind of like girly. They're like, what is going on here?
Yeah, your vibe at trade shows is definitely unmatched. We have some footage of that from Expo West. We're still trying to figure out what exactly we're doing with that, but that will be released to the people at some point.
Like not sure what we're gonna do with this, but we need to do something.
We got one finished piece of media that's very dope that I think is going to come out very soon, and then we just have a ton of content that we got to figure out what's the best use for it. So. Little digression there, but Emily's a fellow Indiana University graduate, so go Hoosiers. But take us back to where this all started. I think it started with some really cool international travels of yours, but what was the inspiration behind Lil Bucks?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had a love affair with Australia. Actually dating back to when I was at Indiana, I had a scholarship to go study abroad anywhere in the world for a semester.
Wow.
And so I was like, what are the most expensive places to go? Because I would be maxing this out.
Smart. Yeah. Got to max that ROI. Entrepreneur
exactly.
early.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, Copenhagen, cold, or Sydney, Australia, surfing, warm vibes. Yes. So, was already just like super in love with the Aussie lifestyle and like health and wellness and all that. But fast forward, probably like 3.5 years after graduation, I'd been working in Chicago. Actually, ironically, for Hormel Foods was my biggest client. So I was basically like writing tweets for spam canned meat. So that's how
the epitome of regenerative food systems.
I know, and it'll come full circle. But I would have to go to southern Minnesota.
What was the best tweet you wrote for spam? I need to know this.
Oh gosh. I feel like, I don't know, all the tweet that sticks out to me in my tweeting career was actually for Four Loko, and I was like, I wish you could be an octopus so you could drink 8 Four Locos at once. And then it got in trouble because it was like insinuating that you'd drink 8 Four Locos at once. That's illegal. So that one kind of trumped, but like I spent most of my time on spam. I think, yeah.
Okay. Well, ironically, I don't know if you know, one of the founders of Four Loko is also now in the natural food industry with Koya. So this is
Yes,
this is
yes.
a path that we're all on, you know?
I know it's like I feel like we like come broken and dejected from our whatever weird food and alcohol experiences. And we need to make this better. But anyways, that was a major digression. But so yeah, when I'm done with spam, I need something new. I take a job at an agency in Sydney, Australia, and I, of course, ironically land on like basically the Tyson chicken of Australia. So just big meat keeps being my like thing, I guess. And then while I was there, I had a life-changing acai bowl where the cafe that I got this acai bowl from offered sprouted buckwheat seeds instead of your traditional granola on top of the bowl. And so they're like, do you want the granola or do you want the buckwheat? And I'm like, usually granola is pretty crap and like full of sugar. And I don't know, it doesn't really add much for me. So I was like, sure, I don't really know what these seeds are, but I'll take those. And immediately just became, obsession. Like the crunch of the seeds on this like cold smoothie bowl. I just love the texture. It holds up really well in the bowl. And then I just felt really amazing after eating it. So like really energized, really satisfied for hours after. And turns out buckwheat, I literally went back to the cafe and we're like, we need to know more about these seeds. Like,
Which cafe
this?
was it? Where was it in Bondi? Like, we paint the picture.
Oh, yes, it was in Bondi. Well, actually, Bronte. It's actually now in Bondi because I was just back there a few months ago. But it's called Bare Naked Bowls.
Love that.
There we go. The OG ones in Manly, and they still do it like the same bowl. The same bowl is there. I got it a few months ago.
That's so cool.
Shout out.
Yeah. Oh, for real. I know. I went back and there was a bunch of Brazilians working there when I went, and they were just kind of like, "What? This is cool. Okay." So I was like, "Y'all gave me the idea for my company." But anyways, yeah. So I just started. So it turned out buckwheat, like why I felt so good after eating it, is because it's super high in plant-based protein, prebiotic fiber, and it's gluten and grain-free. So technically, buckwheat is a fruit seed. That's the fun fact. Technically not a grain. And so I just started, I noticed at the grocery store, I'm like, well, I need this for everything now. Yeah, like topping smoothies, oatmeal. I put it on top of my overnight oats, yogurt. I'd make energy balls with it, put on salads. Like, I thought maybe being from the Midwest, like we just missed out on this superfood, and like surely it's a massive thing in like California. So I started noticing it was like, since I was so obsessed with it, and I was buying these 1 pound bags of sprouted buckwheat from the grocery store, and then started noticing like buckwheat was used as a hero ingredient in a lot of breakfast and snacking products. And even like in chocolate bars, it was used as a crunch. And obviously cafes and restaurants, like the uses were smoothies, avocado toast, etc. All the best things in life. And so like, yeah, it was just kind of crazy when it came time to move back to America. I actually moved back for love, and now we're married. So I made a good bet on that one. Yeah. Good thing. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm gonna like leave wonderful Sydney, Australia, and come back to Chicago for you, like I'm gonna need to at least like start
eat some buckwheat
thing. Yeah, I mean,
have some buckwheat.
Yeah,
it's a deal breaker.
It's a deal breaker. Really, I was like, I will wither away, and to this day, I would probably wither away if it weren't for buckwheat. But yeah, it was just a shock when I was coming back. No, it started really innocent, like absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like all of my like work experience had been tweeting for like meat companies and Four Loko, and then graphic design freelance. And so, but just like this innocent, like, oh, no brand in the US is focused on this amazing superfood ingredient that aligns with all these trends, and that it actually tastes good. It's not like weird. It has all these versatile applications. And then like the thing that was just brought it all together was that it's amazing for soil health and it grows really well
Mm,
in many parts of the US. And I'm like,
mm,
why aren't we like capitalizing on this? This is crazy.
mhm.
So it just kind of was like, oh, I got to start this buckwheat thing. Like, even while I was still in Australia, was like rambling on to people about buckwheat, and people were like, I don't know
Yeah.
what they're feeding her in Australia, and the answer is buckwheat. But um, yeah, it just kind of started from this idea, and then when I was in Chicago, figuring out trying to start it, of course, like I'm like, well, obviously I need buckwheat. So how do you find that? And I just like went on found this weird like HTML website from the 90s that's like a directory of
What,
organic
Emily,
farmers.
what year was this? What year was this?
Oh, this was 2017, 2018. So I launched in
Okay.
2018, almost 5 years ago.
Okay. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Huge.
thank you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely come a long way. I mean, the first couple of years were very much farmers markets, making it in
Mm.
shared kitchens, figuring it out, rah, rah, rah. But nevertheless, 5 years coming up. And yeah, so moved back to the US in 2017, and that's when I was kind of like trying to figure out how I launched this buckwheat company, and found some organic farmers, started calling them, turned down calling their homes because farmers like live on the farm. I just had no
Yeah.
idea. Like, I come from like suburban Chicago and then like northern Indiana, which obviously there are farms around, but like I have
Yeah.
no farmers in my network
Hmm.
until now. And when I called them like, hey, can I buy buckwheat from you? They're like, okay, we'll help this girl. And just like some of them spent like an hour on the phone with me
Wow.
each, just talking about how things kind of work in the US agriculture system and how they'd love to grow buckwheat. And but there's just not really a big market for it. And a lot of the buckwheat consumed in the US is from China, which is true. Um,
Hmm.
and some of them have grown it even at a loss just to improve their soil health. So it was
Mm.
just like completely insane. Like, the more like obvious flags of why Lil Bucks should
Right.
exist,
Right.
we're like, okay. So I was just like, okay, cool. I'll make a market for you. How hard will that be? And off to the races, basically. Launched at
Yeah.
farmers markets and scaled up from there.
You mentioned soil health twice now, and I'm curious, like your perspective in 2017, coming back to the US, like what was your awareness of the regenerative movement and the
Mm.
importance of soil health at that time, or was it really those farmer conversations that sort of spurred that interest in soil health?
Mm.
So, what's actually, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but maybe foreshadowing. But even what kind of initially even put sustainable agriculture on my radar, I don't even think the word regenerative was used when I came across it, but I was super lost in my like spam for loco tweeting days. Like, I feel I'm
Mm.
so hungry and want to like do something, like work for a company that's bettering,
Mm.
either aligned with my lifestyle, being like health and wellness or like outdoor adventure
Mm.
sports, and or like bettering the earth. I was like applying to anything,
Mm.
like NGOs in the sustainability world, like just so hungry to provide more to the world than my tweets.
Mm.
And the first business book I ever read was Let My People Go Surfing, of
Oh
course,
wow.
Mm.
by
Mm.
Von Chouinard, which
That's the
classic.
least shocking thing I've heard ever.
Yeah, that's literally like, oh, like what? You can't reel me in with just like business. It needs to be
Yeah.
about like surfing at least. I need a hook. But yeah, I mean, that was just super eye-opening of like, gosh,
Mm.
I mean, at the time I just became obsessed with going to work at Patagonia, and fast forward, I
Mm.
don't think that was obviously the fit. The fit was for me to start my own
Mm.
thing that aligns with the values and uses a certification that Patagonia actually helped come up with. But in that book, Von Chouinard talks about like our best chances at fighting climate change is going to be with agriculture. So that's like the first time that even was on my radar.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
then going to Australia, just kind of like having a very light understanding of it. And then actually in the Let My People Go Surfing book, Von mentions buckwheat in particular as being great
Really?
for carbon sequestration. I know I need to like
Wow.
frame this like
Wow.
little paragraph.
Wow.
Someone like emailed it to me a couple years in, and I was like, it actually, because I remember reading it, but it actually says buckwheat.
The universe was laying hints for you everywhere, girl.
Isn't that
Totally.
crazy?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like a very light understanding. And then doing more research on, okay, so this is really good for soil health. Why is it good for soil health? And then these conversations with the farmers, and they want to grow it, but there's just not a market for it. And it's like, that just seems so silly when we're like forcing all of these crops that are like not good for the earth into the universe, and like they're not as good for people. I don't know. The whole thing seems silly. So what can we do to change it?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about why buckwheat's so good. And I've recently connected with a couple other founders for startup CPGs who are trying to address the same issue you are, that buckwheat is an incredible crop, both for human and planetary health.
Mm-hmm.
And you are probably way more buckwheat expert than I am, but based on the limited understanding I have, buckwheat doesn't grow well while being sprayed, right? Like with fertilizers and pesticides and things like that, it performs worse than if it were just there. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just like a beautiful, it's perfect for an organic farm, honestly. Like it grows really well in cold climates, poor, sometimes poor soil. Um, and it acts as a fertilizer on its own. So it's almost kind of ironic that it doesn't really respond to, fertilizer or like kind of conventional farming practices as well. So buckwheat also is a really fast crop. So it's a great cover crop option. It flowers in 77 to 90 days, and it flowers into these beautiful flowers. So people, once again, it's not a wheat. Um, Whoever came up with the word buckwheat comes from, I think it's like a Russian word. Don't quote me on that, even though it's literally being recorded on this podcast. But that means like obviously wheat is in that, and then buck means like looks like wheat. So it's like in their translation, it's kind of like seems like wheat, but it's not. But then when it translates to English, it's buckwheat, and everyone's like wheat.
Right.
Interesting.
My favorite thing about it is that it's a cover crop that is commercializable, right? So we can create a commercial market and it's edible, right? Whereas like most cover crops, you can't do that. So we're just paying to get the soil health benefit, whereas the farmer can plant this, get the soil health benefit, and then actually hopefully sell it into an end market. Hence why we need brands, everyone, to create market demand for these things. And Emily has a killer sustainability page on the website. We'll link it in the show notes. Check it out. There's all kinds of fun buckwheat stats and stories and cool stuff on there. But I think that's super important, and probably the most important piece of like, we have to make this more commercial, right? And so it nails that bullseye.
Yeah. And yeah, oh my gosh, my sustainability page on the website is kind of an insane manifesto. But like literally
awesome.
Shopify we had to like have a developer like custom go in because it was like too many sections.
Yeah.
Like that Shopify doesn't even have available.
Yeah.
But I have a lot to say about buckwheat. But yeah, no, it's just so incredible. And like all these uses right now, so when we mill the buckwheat, just over half of a general like milling run comes out as the seed, which we're using for that crunch that we love. And but then there's also the like kind of side yield of that is the buckwheat flour, which actually is more commonly consumed in the US right now. So
Really?
we're playing around with some buckwheat flour creations, and then also have been talking to some other brands about collaborating or having them buy the buckwheat flour off of us. So it's this full circle, like, and then even like buckwheat pillows are super popular, which is made from the hull, like the outside shell of the buckwheat, which I feel like is kind of messed up because I don't have one.
When you say buckwheat flour, are you saying that the plant actually flowers and we're talking about like a flour? Or are you saying buckwheat flour that's been like grinded and created that could like used for baking?
Grinded and created. So when the buckwheat mill, because the buckwheat seeds are harvested, they have these little black shells on them. And then they have to go through, when they go through milling, it's almost like shaking the shell off. And so we get the end seed, which is like this cute little heart-shaped seed. But then in that process, just naturally some of the seeds will break And so you end up with a lot of seeds, but you end up with a lot of the broken seeds, which is the flour. And then that's just further milled down into, certain specks of flour, like baking
Let's
flour.
go.
So
Yeah.
Buckwheat to the moon. Let's go.
Yeah.
I know. And then you can use the shells as like this thing for buckwheat pillows. That's like a massive thing. Like if you look up buckwheat pillows, like I've had
All
to
right.
compete with buckwheat pillows for SEO for years.
Who
funny.
knew? So
It's-
as you're
yeah.
painting this picture of the journey of buckwheat, I'm very much like to make it make sense in my brain, I'm thinking about sunflowers. And so like the center of the sunflower are the seeds that come out, and that's what you're milling, and the outside hull is what's being used for the pillows, and the kernel inside is the actual buckwheat seed. And is that like an accurate representation of what's happening here?
Yeah. And I would actually we're actually playing around with using some regenerative sunflower in a SKU. So I wouldn't be able to comfortably answer that question until now, but I was like, oh,
Okay.
I know everything about buckwheat. Now I need to learn about something else.
Well, there's two other things I want to talk about with your journey. Number one, you sort of left us off in the entrepreneurial side of Lil Bucks at the farmers market. So let's talk about how that transition took place. And I also want to dive into the importance of sprouted versus non-sprouted. So tell us why that's important to you and why it's important for Lil Bucks.
Oh yeah, I guess that is a big thing with buckwheat. So, and kind of why probably um buckwheat hasn't had its huge moment yet. It's happening it's coming. It's right now. It's here. But buckwheat has to be cooked or sprouted in order for us to absorb the nutrients. So buckwheat, the most common ways it's consumed in the US. People from Russian and Ukrainian descent, like literally this is a national dish for them, is called kasha, which is cooked buckwheat seeds, which almost makes like a porridge. And it's used as like a sweet or savory side dish. It's literally like at every meal. When I was at farmers markets in Chicago, which actually has a massive like Eastern European, like presence, every time without fail, like at least one person like who's like usually Ukrainian, running up like, oh my gosh, I grew up on buckwheat.
Sounds like grits. Like it kind of sounds like grits. Like and people make it sweet or savory.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like a big way it's consumed. And if you go to like any Russian, like grocery store, you would see like raw buckwheat seeds available to purchase, but it's being cooked. And then obviously with flour that, is being cooked. Soba noodles are actually Japanese. I think are the number 3 consumers of buckwheat in the world. They love buckwheat. But soba noodles are made from buckwheat. So a lot of pasta and bread, of course. But then we have these seeds, which are super crunchy and delicious eaten in their raw form, but humans won't absorb the nutrients unless it's sprouted or cooked. So you have to sprout the seeds. They sprout really quickly in 7 to 8 hours. You'll see tails. Wow. Like if you put raw buckwheat in your kitchen and soak, and then just let it sit for like 7, 8 hours.
Just water. You just have to soak it in water. That's it.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. Cool. And then we dehydrate. So then it's back to like a certain amount of moisture level. So it's not reabsorbing moisture. And then that gives it shelf stability. And then also this really great crunch that we're using as a base for like everything. And then you have all these amazing new uses that the Aussies were doing and we're missing out on.
And is this all like vertically integrated? Do you have your own manufacturing processing facility? Have you found great partners to help you like work through these processes? What does that look like?
Yeah, so actually all partners right now. So that's been really cool. And the more we've gone on this journey, the more we've like honed in on the Midwest. Obviously I started it in the Midwest. I was originally making it out of shared kitchens in Chicago. And the first thing I was like, I need to find a partner for this is the sprouting, because I'm sprouting, like germinating live seeds in a shared commercial kitchen next to people like making barbecue. And, you're just kind of like, I don't think this is viable for a long time. Like it was in a commercial kitchen. I was licensed, but and also just like the manual, like, oh my gosh, these buckets of like wet seeds. It was such a workout. Anyways, so it was one of those fortuitous things. I feel like there's been a lot of things like challenges we've had. Like we've grown up in a pandemic and like global ridiculous supply chain, like economic collapse and like Trump being president. So like we've had our share of challenges, and like maybe poor timing here and there, but there's a few moments that have had really amazing timing, or fortuitous people that I met that kind of made me believe, wow, this is so, so meant to be. And one of them was meeting our sprouting partner at a trade show. I literally was at Expo West, had snuck in to the show. Talk about that off air.
New Hope team
And
listening, you didn't hear that.
no, yeah, no, that definitely. I paid back my dues by buying a booth.
There you go.
But yeah, I had doing the backpack sampling thing. And I literally just walked by a booth and saw like sprouting on their like backdrop. And I was like, sprouting? Like, I sprout buckwheat. They're like, so do we. And I was like, oh.
Wow.
And they're just like these
Let's
like
be
hippies
friends.
that like started sprouting back in the day. And now they're like a massive international sprouting supplier. So
Wow.
we actually started sprouting with them. And then now we've like found more partners as well, and just trying to get everything closer and closer to. So most are sourcing, obviously buckwheat's our number one main ingredient, and we've moved down our ingredient supply chain list. We're trying to, obviously we have this regenerative mission with buckwheat, but like, why wouldn't we have that then with anything else we're sourcing? So
Let's go.
yeah,
Let's go.
that's been really cool, is just learning. Obviously we're here to bring buckwheat to the people and create opportunities for farmers to grow this awesome cover crop, but like with that we can support like regenerative, like maple syrup, coconut, going down the line, cacao.
Emily, take us through the arc, and maybe they're congruent, maybe they're not, right? But the arc of commercialization of, hey, we're just selling maybe raw buckwheat or sprouted buckwheat at the farmer's market, and now you have like this full product line with some innovation. Like, how did that happen? And then you've always been sourcing buckwheat, but like, when did the focus happen on regen, and why, and like, where does that sit today?
Right. So let's see. I'll start with, I guess, actually right before the pandemic. So Cluster Bucks is our lead product line right now, especially in retail where we're seeing the most growth. It would be about 75% of the business this year. And, that's in things from like the classic natural food stores like Whole Foods Midwest, Erewhon, Bristol Farms, etc. And then some conventional like HEB and a couple divisions of Kroger and Albertsons. So figuring out a product line that works well for the mass market was really important. But in the early days, like what I was selling was Lil Bucks sprouted buckwheat crunch. It was really just like this crunchy seeds that were an ode to my first experience trying buckwheat in Australia. So we have that, and original cacao and cinnamon. And I would sell it at markets where I'd be there to be like, oh, add this on top of your yogurt instead of sugary granola. And I'm there to tell people, like, show them this new seed. So we had this really strong customer base in Chicago. And when the pandemic hit, that our D2C blew up, which was great. But of course, this is one of those like quote unquote bad timing things, but I think it worked out the way it was supposed to for sure. But we were supposed to launch Lil Bucks into Whole Foods Midwest March 2020.
Wow.
That was our big launch. Like I raised friends and family money 2 months prior, like the first time I raised any money. And this was where I was like, okay, like big leagues. I trained up 20 brand ambassadors because the Midwest is such a vast region. And like the only strategy was like, we are going to sample the crap out of this. Because once people know what it is, there's no competition. And like, it becomes this like pantry staple for people. So it's like, we just got to sample it. And then once they're hooked, it's done. Obviously that strategy did not come to fruition because there was a pandemic. We also didn't even like hit the shelf until August. It was just a total disaster because we weren't prioritized. Like people wanted mac and cheese, not like some weird random buckwheat. And then they like when we finally were getting in, they put us in like lentils or like weird places of the store. So
and that's not that's not a high velocity area either. So like you have to do the demos to then drive repurchase too on top of trial because it's a pantry staple that it might take them months to go through the bag, right?
Right. And like Whole Foods was completely overwhelmed as well. Like everything that we do to execute in retail right now, like was basically like totally blown out. Like you go on promotions, you try to do like some heavy sales at the start to gain trial. There, like Whole Foods was like no promos for like 18 months, unless you're like probably have a little more power than I did as a small brand. So that was tough, but that was kind of a big learning of like, well, this sucks, but you want this to be in every pantry in America, and like the scalability factor of like having to sample this to gain any trial is a that's pretty big marketing investment to do nationwide. So what can we like, how can we create buckwheat in a format that is more familiar to consumers? So that's where the Cluster Bucks granola cluster concept came in, something that is snackable on the go. Like now we even have single serves that are going to airports and like offices on the go. So there's just like a wide application for Cluster Bucks. And then how I went from, what was the second part of that question again? It was like
just the commercialization journey and then the regen journey.
Yeah. So always from the start, like when I was making in shared kitchens, I was actually buying the buckwheat. I was emptying, because after talking to my farmer friends and being like, so I can't just like buy it from you? Like, how does this work?
Yeah.
And they're like, not how it works. I was emptying out the bulk bins at Whole Foods of like their raw buckwheat groats, which I liked because they were USA grown. And a lot of buckwheat, like if you look online, a lot of buckwheat consumed in the US comes from China. Russia is the number one producer of buckwheat, then China, then the Ukraine, and then the US, which obviously, fast forward to doing American sourcing from the start, served us really well once the Russia-Ukraine war hit. But
you've had a hell of a 5-year window to launch a product.
It really is. I'm like,
top 3 geography supply chain.
I know.
Trade wars, actual wars, just a couple things.
I know, like, honestly, I didn't know, like, there's so much I didn't know, obviously, starting this. And that's, I guess, one of those things that maybe it's a sign from the universe that we're doing this the right way. But I was just sourcing from the US because of our mission to create this opportunity for North American farmers. We're not against Canada, but to grow this cover crop. And so I was just sourcing it from the US because that's what I wanted to do. It was a little more expensive, but that aligned with our mission. And then, so I was buying from Whole Foods. They're finally like, can you stop emptying our bulk bins? You can just buy it from us directly. And we'll like place your wholesale orders and we'll like pick it up at customer service.
Nice.
Yeah. So they're like, please stop doing that. And then
I'm just like picturing you like on a step ladder in like center aisle and like 2 Whole Foods workers like end of aisle just like looks like side-eyeing you like, what is wrong with this chick?
I know there's a lot of moments in this history of Lil Bucks where people are like, what is the strategy here?
It's awesome.
This person really likes buckwheat, and I do. And gosh, when we started scaling up to go to, so then we found our sprouting partner, and I was like, this is massive, because that was the biggest hurdle of producing in the shared kitchen in Chicago. So actually the sprouting partner, they usually only sprout, I think that maybe they just vibed with me and like this mission and kind of reminded them of how they started. Like they were just like these hippie sprouting seeds, and then it turned into this massive business. So I drove up, they're actually in Ontario, Canada. So I drove across the border. That was an adventure in and of itself.
Fitting.
There's always stories. But they ended up co-packing the Lil Bucks line entirely, which isn't something they normally do. But they were like, let's try mixing. So we brought in the maple syrup and the spices that we use, and they end up mixing and creating the product there. And through this partner, they have the buying power, since they're like already massive seed and grain sprouters. They're already contracting like, with mills and farms around the world for whatever they need. So I was like, hey, I kind of want to continue to use US buckwheat. Is that possible? And they're like, yes. And I was like, I found this mill. They're like, oh, we've sourced from this mill before. And it's the mill we're using now still. And so I was able to, through them, just request US buckwheat, which was more expensive, but again, aligned with the mission. So we were always able to do that. And then in 2021 was when I met Luke Peterson from A-Frame Farms,
Yeah.
who's like an absolute regen legend.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how we like originally got connected, but I feel like we are like the most kindred spirits, just born in like little bit different worlds, like him into a farming community and me into like suburban Chicago and having no idea anything about farm. I'm tweeting for Four Loko, like different world. Like he's feeding the earth and I'm tweeting.
Yeah.
And so it was just one conversation. He's literally on as our farm, an advisor for the business now, as like the voice of the farmer as we grow, and making sure we're like always doing right by the farmers. But we had one conversation. We're both obsessed with buckwheat. He's like, he has this crazy like 9 to 12 year crop rotations going on at this farm in Minnesota. It's insanely impressive.
Yeah, their operation is very legit. We'll link some things in the show notes. They're super cool operators.
Yeah, amazing and just lovely people. And it was in Minnesota near this mill that I'd already been working with. So we had one chat. I don't even know. I mean, we agreed an email at least. I don't even know if we had a contract the first year. We're like, let's just grow some buckwheat and see what happens. And like, I'll buy it. And so we just like agreed, and did about 50,000 pounds the first year, which turned out great. Like it was even a Minnesota drought that year and we got an awesome yield. So just kind of like full steam ahead, let's double down. Like, and then that's when the next year we were contracting, Mad Agriculture came into the picture.
Nice.
And they're great. So they were originally helping. I didn't know who they were at first. But they were supporting Luke in some of the business side of running a regenerative farm and helping him like with the contracting and everything. So that's how we met. Was they're like, hey, we're doing the contract for Luke. You two are insane. Like, yeah. So yeah, that was so we did about 110,000 pounds last year. Yeah, and then tried to double again. So now we're maxing out as much buckwheat as Luke can grow. We're maxing out. And so now we're already starting to look at other farms, hopefully maybe get some small stuff this year. Because then what we've contracted with a mill is doing custom regenerative organic certified buckwheat runs. So about 60% of the buckwheat we're using this year across all lines is regenerative organic certified. And we just got our Lil Bucks line ROC, which is sweet. And yeah, potentially proposed a national launch of an ROC SKU for cluster bucks. So we'll know about that in like a couple weeks. But
is that a specific retailer?
Yes, it's like an entire food. That's your hint.
I see. What you're alluding to here. Down. An entire food.
Yeah.
Or a food found like buried underground in a something.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Like Shia LaBeouf types of food. You know, we're getting really.
Right.
I feel like a lot of our audience probably knows who Mad Ag is, but I just want to give them a quick shout out and a quick rundown on what they do. Started out as a regenerative agriculture nonprofit, really advising farms and kind of getting under the hood and helping farmers stay organic and do regenerative organic transitions or transition to organic / regenerative organic. Now what they've basically spit out is new entities called Mad Markets and Mad Capital. Mad Capital being a financing mechanism to actually help the farmers with all of that stuff and capitalization of those journeys. And then Mad Markets, which is the team that Emily, I think we're closest with, which is they help connect raw regenerative organic goods with brands and buyers like Emily so that we can create this market demand that spurs more consistent, profitable, stable markets for the farmers to stay in these crops or transition to these crops, which we need so many more awesome ecosystems like Mad Ag. So shout out to Phil and his whole crew over there for what they've built, because it's amazing. And I just wanted to touch on that for a second.
Hell yeah. And actually, we're doing a pilot program with Mad Ag. So it was kind of beautiful because it started from this market need, and kind of like we're working with them with Luke, and I talked to Alex and I was like, wait a minute, like, we're just getting started, but we're planning to grow quickly. And it is already like, wow, overwhelming, especially now that the industry is finally, valuing regenerative, which is great. But we're going to need help like building out supply chains, and like you can help farmers introduce this crop and all that. Like I found Luke on my own, but having them as a resource as we grow is going to be huge. And then it kind of turned into, we're now doing this pilot program with them. So Mad Agriculture is working with us for buckwheat, and then Purely Elizabeth for oats. And we're measuring, so on each of these farms for each of our crops, we're measuring the soil health and nutrition of, the buckwheat being, where the buckwheat's being grown in the soil at A-frame, what the impact is. And then also on top of that, I think we might be able, I know they're doing this for oats for sure. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to do it for buckwheat, but I think we figured it out, is also measuring the nutrition of regeneratively farmed buckwheat versus conventionally farmed buckwheat. And obviously with that comes all these like amazing like little sound bites that of course we can use in consumer and buyer marketing, investor stuff, but like even we'll have a white paper at the end of the day of like, here's the measurable impact of buckwheat and its role in a regenerative food system. And like,
let's
I don't know, take it to the government. Like, let's do this.
Let's go.
So that's pretty an honor to be a part of, like coming from just like this place of, like reading about sustainable agriculture and buckwheat, ironically, and let my people go surfing. And then just kind of like doing this because it's the right thing to do, and not fully understanding everything that is going on behind the scenes, but just like, well, we're going to figure it out because that just seems like the right way to do things. And then now it's like, oh man, it's happening. And this is really cool. Like farmers are coming to us really interested in being able to grow it. So I'm excited to create more opportunities. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Bug wild.
Yeah, I think that research piece is super important, and we talk about this a lot. And as I was looking at your sustainability page, I was positively struck by the sort of order of operations, or the order of the value propositions that you have listed on your website. And we've talked about it on a few other episodes, but people are self-interested, and as great as regenerative agriculture is, like people may not be as spurred to buy something just because it's good for the planet. But if they can understand how it's good for them also and good for the planet, I think that's the perfect 1-2 punch to really get conversion and action there. Oh, and Anthony's throwing up a number 3 sign. So,
and I think it's 3-pronged, right? So we need the data and the studies on the farm. We need the data and the studies on the processing. And then we need the nutrient density studies on the finished product. And if we have all that data that we can just say comprehensively, this is better across the entire supply chain, like we'll have really strong communication for all the different leverage points to influence all the different people that you just said, which I think would be money.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what's so cool is this research is happening across different sectors right now. Like I just had a conversation earlier this week with Stefan Van Vliet, who's doing all sorts of stuff with meat in particular, and how grass-fed cattle is different from grain-fed cattle, which is also different from multi-species grass-fed cattle. So that biodiverse diet actually has a quantifiable impact on the nutrition of the meat being consumed, and he's taking it to the human level and how it impacts the human health aspect. So it's crazy, the stuff that's happening right now, and it's great to hear that it's happening in buckwheat also, which who knew?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it is really interesting. Like it's on the consumer side, that's actually something I'm thinking a lot about, because we're announcing the regenerative organic certification to, I mean, like it's not like a secret, but like we haven't done our official announcement yet for Lil Bucks, and like why this is important. And I think, like hoorah on LinkedIn and like in the industry, that'll be great. But like, how do we communicate this and make sure people understand why it's important? And one of the reasons like we pursued certification and not just, doing the good work, I don't know. Remember Anthony at the RFSI, how heated the like
Yeah.
certification?
Yeah.
That was like, I was like, this is a day in itself. Like
Yeah.
the conversations that could be had. So I think there's a lot of value in a lot of different certifications. So I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole, but just the value of getting certified in general. Like, I'm really don't want regenerative to become, as it gains traction and understanding for consumers, like organic did, that it's
hmm
not losing its value because of greenwashing and random companies that are actually doing worse for the planet and sourcing crap
hmm
ingredients from overseas and conventionally farmed. And then they're like, but we regenerate. It's like, no.
Yeah.
So actually certifying, and then I think the ROA does a really good job of like the consumer facing side of it, the marketing. Like, it's a nice, easy to understand label itself,
hmm
and how they have their three pronged, like quick way they convey the values of
Yeah.
like
The value add.
what they're measuring with the
Hmm
certification. But I think that's a big one. I think the business world is starting to really understand why regenerative is important. Like, even going back to like the Russia-Ukraine war, like a
Yep.
massive company tried to buy A-Frame's buckwheat that we had contracted with them, and it might have just been an email contract. Don't really remember. I need to look back at this. But it doesn't matter now because we got the buckwheat. It's all good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Luke literally was like, bug off. Like, Lil Bucks wanted to buy this before there was a
mm
big war and you couldn't get your stuff from Russia and Ukraine. So, like,
mm
good luck. Find it somewhere else.
hmm
And so, just like good business to be, I mean, the supply, the costs, not only the environmental costs, but like the costs of shipping. Um,
Yeah.
Having all of our milling and production now is mostly in Minnesota, Wisconsin.
hmm
Um, it's just good business.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, uh, so that's exciting, but I think the next challenge is how we communicate this to the consumer. Because
Yep.
even with buckwheat, it's so good for you. And in the early days, I'd be like, oh my gosh, try Lil Bucks. It's like gluten free, grain free, high protein, high fiber, super 10 times more antioxidants than quinoa. And people are like, so this must be horrible. Like, this
Yeah.
must be gross.
The attribute
And
avalanche.
yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, just like so excited to share everything, all the attributes. It's like good for the planet. And then people are like, what is this? Does it taste
Yeah.
good? How do I eat it? So,
hmm
already with consumers, I learned we have to be like, this is delicious. This is how you eat it. It's good for you
That's
and it's
it.
good for the planet. So it's almost like
Yeah.
the follow up is going to be a lot of like, even in our marketing funnels, it's like the end part, like post purchase is like making them feel good about it. And
Mm.
then I think the storytelling from the farmers, so like the work that Mad Ag is doing, connecting brands to the farms is
Yeah.
massive because they're not just like doing like some brokering deal and walking away. They're doing a lot of
Mm.
storytelling and arming the brands with, you know, photography, storytelling to actually bring these farmers' stories to life. And that's what,
hmm
back when I was working at Hormel Foods, we were begging, I was on the corporate responsibility team, and like we were begging them to share more about like the actual producers because that's what people want to
hmm
feel a connection to their food.
Yeah. I forgot about to include that piece. I'm really happy you brought that up because I think the storytelling, the media, nailing the messaging is going to be so key for the movement overall and the brands themselves. I mean, we've talked about this on a lot of episodes right now. I think it's a foregone conclusion. We know the typical CPG value, leading value props. That's what you got to lead with from a product standpoint, and then you have to backdoor that with the regen education because at
Mm-hmm.
point of purchase, people don't want to be educated. They just want to buy something that's tasty and that they think is priced appropriately or has the appropriate value, right? But we have to attach all these awesome attributes on the front end to the regen ag on the back end. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the certification thing, it's still such a wild west, and we support all the efforts out there. And I think Heather Terry said it really well when she kind of just said transparency ends greenwashing. And I think what I
Mm-hmm.
would add to that, in agreement of that, is yes, and we are bad as a collective about talking about regenerative in nuance. And what I mean by that is there are regenerative practices, and there might be growing farms where they just use one practice, and that's great, and we should celebrate that, but we should acknowledge it as they just use one regenerative practice. They might not have a fully regenerative system. Then there
Right.
are fully regenerative systems of different levels and different variations, and that's a different thing. And we have to get better with our vernacular about articulating that and articulating it in a concise way that consumers can actually understand, because I do think that nuance is good so that we can get people on the continuum at different entry points. But we also need to acknowledge there's different levels of efficacy, integrity, etc.
Right. Yeah. And it's also like, I think everyone regenerative is going to mean something different to like the coconut farmer in Sri Lanka versus like the buckwheat farmer in Minnesota. So like
Yep.
having these general concepts that we all agree on and like different levels of regenerative, but like that's going to look different because that's how Earth is. Like it is diverse.
Amen.
That's what we're all going for.
Amen.
So
yeah. And
totally
it's such a challenge because the shoppers are conditioned because of the way they interact with food today to look for binary, certified or not certified, whatever. So this nuance you discuss, and and Anthony, you know, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to utilize the mechanisms that are already existing within retail with the signage and the way that consumers are conditioned to try to like break through that binary system to develop that nuance. And that's something I really think that we as an industry and as a regenerative movement need to try to help the retailers answer that question, because otherwise we're stuck in the same system that we have been this whole time, where it's like maybe regenerative becomes the next organic, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We have to see where it lands.
I know somebody who's working on some things to help solve that problem. Do you know that guy?
Yeah, we'll see what happens here in the next 3-6 months.
Yeah, good points all around. Emily, I want to give you a chance to talk about your fundraising journey. Female founder, pandemic, global supply chain disruption, first time founder. I mean, I'm an investor, so full discretion for everyone listening, and I'm a proud investor. But what has that journey been like? What have been some challenges? What have been some successes? And where do you kind of just see the landscape right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like given everything you listed, those are all challenging, even on their own, each of those things to fundraise. It is kind of funny. Maybe funny is the wrong word, but how like everyone's really doom and gloom about fundraising right now. And obviously it's a really challenging environment. And it's something that like, of course I stress out over, but like, I'm like, it's always been pretty hard. It's actually probably easier than it's ever been for me because our business is doing well. And so
it's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing
I'm
to hear you
like,
say that.
this sucks, but like, it's always sucked. Like, I think some people maybe are shocked, like, maybe like the white boys out there, like, wait, fundraising is hard now. I'm like, yes, it's always been this way, boys. But
welcome to the party, fellas.
I'm like, nothing's changed. But yeah, it's been, I think there's like, there's some valid reasons that it was hard, like first time founder, all these things, like this kind of crazy, unproven buckwheat concept that, took some time for me to figure out the right product market fit, which came from like, I think experience in the industry and understanding like, you're not going to go global out the gate. I see Lil Bucks being in every pantry, that product line. But it's just like a slower roll because it's going to take a longer time for consumer adoption of like a new super seed versus something that's like something people understand. So I get that. And then, being a woman's always sucked and like still sucks. This doesn't sound very positive, but like, I don't know if there's been that much improvement in that. And that's just kind of something I'm used to at this point. And finding the right investors that see past that. I've definitely always had more success with angel investors because at the end of the day, even when people believe in like investing in women and minorities, different ideas, like it's just going to take a really long time for that concept to permeate in institutions and firms. So, we can't wait around for that. The business is still growing. And now I think that we're at a really interesting point. Like we're definitely still fundraising and probably still going the angel route given what's going on with the environment. Because we're at a point where like back in the day when people are like, well, we want to see you hit 1 million in sales. That's what all the firms say. Now we're like, okay, like we're here, we did it. And they're like, how about 2.5 million? And I'm like, perfect. So, everyone's being very,
Right.
Cautious.
And also some are supporting their current brands and what they might need. So I get that. And then on the regenerative side, like this is something, Anthony, we've obviously talked about, and like it's just becoming very real. Like the need for investment in the regenerative brands, because obviously the farmers need financing mechanisms to grow this, and like there's specific solutions for them. And then in CPG, traditionally, they're like, there's inventory financing and, VC financing, investor financing. But we're kind of at an interesting point because we're earlier on as a business, and we're taking a really big, we're putting out a lot of capital up front to buy regenerative ingredients. And we wouldn't be in this cash position if we just sourced regular buckwheat. Then we could just buy it from commodity markets and like buy what we need at a time. But because we want to support regenerative and have this mission and create opportunities for farmers, we have to contract like $150,000 plus of ingredients that we're going to buy like come the end of the harvest at once. And it's like, what are the financing options for that? Like there are some. So obviously I'm like working on the traditional things. They just are a little harder to get. And then it's just like doesn't really seem like there's many options for, I mean, I'm looking at some grants, but most of them again are for the actual growers. And it's like, well, we wouldn't have this cash thing if we weren't having the mission. Everyone wants the mission, but like there is this funding part. So that's going to be, I'm really interested to see, like, I'm confident, like there's a lot of ways we can figure it out and it's not going to be easy, but I'm hoping that more options come out for brands because it's quite a pickle.
Well, I could talk about this for hours. And one, just appreciate you sharing all that. I think, receiving everything that you just said, it's like part of the problem is we have upstream disease as a movement, and we talk about holistic systems and stuff all the time, but then we fail to solve for like food system solutions, which really is frustrating. And part of the problem is we haven't coalesced as a stakeholder group in brands and CPG to better articulate a vision and a value proposition and an impact proposition and a return proposition to all the different sources of capital in the ecosystem. And we have to coordinate equity, debt, and philanthropic capital to come downstream to the brands in a way that we can very clearly articulate how it affects upstream. We know that. The three people on this call know that, but we have to just do so much more work to help do that. And I'm trying to, be a part of that. So anyone that wants to work on that, my DMs and email is wide open, and we're going to get the job done. I just think that's really the task at hand. It's like, can we do that fast enough with the urgency needed to help people like yourself that are at the cutting edge right now, that need the capital right now for the reasons that you just said. And we've kind of had this love affair with farmers, and rightfully so, that, hey, if you're going to be regen, it has to be different, and the financing looks different, and the farms look different. And then we just kind of say, but the brands, you guys can do the same thing, and like we're just going to treat you the same way. It's like, well, no, that doesn't even make sense if you just think about it really simply, logically like that. So I'm going to stop because I could go on forever, but appreciate you sharing that, and we're going to solve the problem, but it's a problem at the moment.
Retweet.
Back to For Love Co. I think you did a really good job of kind of laying out the differences between a regenerative business model and a regeneratively sourced supply chain versus a commodity, where things are a lot simpler. You can buy, I don't want to say exactly what you need, but you have like a tap you can turn on and turn off. And it's a lot riskier and requires a lot more upfront investment to build a brand. And you're not only building a regenerative brand, you're also developing a new category. So it's like a second uphill battle that you have to fight, right? I mean, in addition to everything else mentioned. Yeah, right? Like, first-time founder, female founder, like all those other challenges. So I think you've done a really good job kind of articulating those challenges, and the fact that you're still wearing a smile on your face and Lil Bucks is doing as well as they're doing. It's just like, it's a great story, and we really appreciate having you on to share.
Thank you.
Yeah,
there's definitely been some moments of like staring at the wall or the ceiling and you're like, how do we possibly get through this. And I feel like there's been so many things walls we busted through that like, and challenges that we've overcome, and to see the products thriving in the marketplace, like there's still a lot of challenges to come, no doubt. Like we're just getting started, like just hit the 1 million in sales, like, you know, starting to get, you know, just passing 1,000 doors, etc. So we're just getting started. The challenges will continue to come, but I think it's really exciting to see, you know, how well the product's doing and the impact we're having. So it's very motivating to keep crushing through.
Yeah. And the vision that I had when I saw the pitch deck for the first time was like, not all the things that we need to incorporate in a regenerative system can be scaled to a large commercial market. But what I saw in Lil Bucks was the chance to create the buckwheat version of Manitoba Harvest. Like there was a time where nobody knew what hemp hearts were. And now they sell the shit out of the raw or the bulk hemp hearts. And they have all these value added products that are formulated with that as like the hero ingredient. And that is a very nice, sizable business that basically was a category creator. And so I also think we need to fund brands that have that kind of potential in this space, because that's how we get the upstream effect of the farmer adoption that actually sustains itself.
Yes. Yeah. We've looked at that path a lot and what I can create with buckwheat, the Quaker oats of buckwheat.
There you go.
But yeah, more fun vibes, not as Quakery.
Quaker is not known for their parties.
Yeah, no. We're Buck Wild.
Yeah, not known for going Buck Wild with bright pink bucket hats.
Yes, exactly.
So this segues nicely into like the future, right? So we mentioned that there's a possible national rollout at a particular retailer that has to do with entire foods. But what else is on the future or in the future for Lil Bucks? Is it more product innovation? Is it more category penetration? What do you see happening in the next, you know, call it 1, 3, maybe 5 years?
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're starting to see like this vision I've had with buckwheat being everywhere, and like the experience I had in Australia was like having it in a restaurant cafe, like as a food service ingredient, and then seeing it used as like an ingredient in specialty products like chocolate bars, and then seeing it as a hero ingredient in granola. So you're seeing all these uses in different channels of the food system. And I've always wanted that for buckwheat, but obviously it took a road to get here and to also just create a consumer demand and interest in the seed. But it's exciting to see. So we have the Lil Bucks and Cluster Bucks, and for the next 2 years, for sure, we're just really like gonna go deep on these product lines. We have a couple new flavors of Cluster Bucks coming out soon. So really excited. They're very like
Can we talk about
indulgent.
those?
Yeah, we can. Well, one's birthday cake because
okay,
like it's our 5th birthday and it's so good. Like and flavors, nostalgic flavors like that do especially well when like in times of world like strife and economic collapse. So I'm like perfect timing.
Where did you get that data stat that birthday cake and indulgent flavors do well during economic, you know, crises and
like that's not the exact phrase, but like I'll let you know.
That was also just an incredible, like badass CEO insight that only Emily could deliver like that, and it was just phenomenal.
I know, like the quotes that could be derived from the weird stuff I say, but I'm like, so that's my understanding. And then the next one's bucks and honey. So there's a really cool story with buckwheat. I don't even think I talked about this, but they're a great pollinator. And that's one of the great roles buckwheat plays in this regenerative system. So, and a honey is also just one of the top selling types of flavors in like the breakfast snacking world. So, we're excited, but so obviously we have our like traditional retail, which we've done a lot of work in the past like 18 months and we'll continue. Like there's a lot of opportunity there from like, you know, entire foods to like, you know, Sprouts, you know, Kroger, Albertsons, blah, blah, blah. But then also our single serves are picking up steam a lot faster than I originally planned on, which is great. But yeah, like just a great on the go snacking opportunities there in the food service and quick food service channels. And then the ingredient, we actually have some pretty big chains R&Ding with the just sprouted regenerative buckwheat as an ingredient.
When you say chains, you're talking like food service chains?
Yeah, like restaurant chains.
Can you come up with like a really clever way to not say the name of any of these chains?
Okay, how
We're
about
getting Emily in trouble from this episode.
I know this I'll be like, I don't have a corporate attorney yet, so I gotta have fun while I can. But gosh, how about like indulgent? I don't know.
I know this one already from the first word.
Dang,
indulgent leaves.
We'll let people use their imagination.
Indulgent leaves. But those obviously take those like going through menu R&D, the rollout for that are like year plus sales cycles. So we've been in some of those for a while. But it's cool to see that channel gaining traction, but I think we'll see more of that. And that obviously creates big opportunities, the ability for us to contract knowing this is going to be on XYZ menu for 8 months. So we're going to plan to have, and they know how much they're using and they have projections on how much they're selling. So I think that'll be a really great way to like double, triple down on the amount of regen buckwheat we can contract. So
that's huge.
And I think that conversation started by an introduction from a fellow value-added investor with the same last name as mine, maybe.
Yeah, weird. How weird is that?
Well, like Tony Sorrow, something like that.
No, it's actually my brother.
Oh, okay.
Emily,
no
my face.
There.
Yeah, my face hurts from smiling and laughing so much. This has been so much fun. I'm gonna take us home with the last question, which is what we kind of wrap every episode with, which is, what do we need to do to have regen brands have 50% market share by 2050?
Ooh, I think we need to, as probably people listening on this call, I mean, obviously it's like everyone, no matter like what your role is in society, we want them to participate in the regenerative movement. So obviously investors invest, buyers buy, and we're starting to see that on the buying side, which is awesome. So like they're giving shelf placement opportunities for regen, but then as the brands, what we need to see to like become 50% of the market share is getting consumers to value buying regenerative, and like maybe the price point is sometimes like there's actually pretty efficient supply chains we can create with regenerative in the US pricing wise, but the price will oftentimes be a little bigger. So like how are we commanding that price by consumers through our brands, our taste, our values? So I think a big one's going to be like convincing consumers to now take part in the regenerative movement. Like we've done all this work to get it there and get the product to them. And now getting them to support it and keep coming back is going to create more opportunities for our own businesses than all these other regen brands to come. Like this is only the beginning.
Great answer.
Oh my God, this is so fun. I love you. Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, this was so fun. I know, like hopefully, I won't get in trouble for anything. I don't think I will.
No.
I didn't say anything.
No.
I was gonna say, one of the things we need to close with, I don't think the listeners know, we might have talked about this before we hit record, is that Emily's currently sitting on a meditation pillow. And to me, it really feels like what you need in your life is a buckwheat meditation pillow.
The vibes.
So that needs to happen sometime this year. I'm just going to put that challenge on you because I think it'll be a game changer.
You're right. It is definitely on my list. It is like written down next to me is outreach to yoga pillow companies, because I'm like, we're going to have all of these. I want to see like a full utilization of the regen buckwheat, like take our holes. So I'm like, and this meditation pillow is, it's been through a pandemic and like supply chain BS. Like we need a new one. So
Lil Bucks is a lifestyle brand, not just a food brand. I love it.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, thanks for sharing your story. It's been awesome. And just appreciate all the great work you're doing growing the buckwheat market.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Emily.
Thank you for going buck wild with me.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.